everyone. It is wonderful to have you here. My name is Sari. I'm the Public Programs Manager at MOFAD. And it's just so exciting that we can all be together online, even when we can't be physically together. It's just wonderful to extend our community and find out where people are from all over the country, potentially all over the world. I know the first program that we did with Gastro Obscura, we had someone from Japan, we had someone from Australia. So it's just a really warm feeling to know that there's people coming from all over to join us. Hey, if you're just joining, if you wouldn't mind just turning off your video cameras, thank you. Excellent. Great. So just a couple housekeeping things as we kick off. First, I know some of you found us through the MOFAD newsletter or the Gastro Obscura newsletter. If you haven't already signed up for both of our newsletters, please do so. That is the best way to find out what programs we're doing. We are doing a partnership, which is what this program is, Gastro Obscura and MOFAD. Our programs together are at this time, Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. So we have a really exciting lineup, including this one. I know next week we are really looking forward to a program with Chef Michael Solomonoff and cookbook author Adina Sussman. We'll be talking about Israeli pantry staples. It's going to be fantastic. So please make sure you're on both of our newsletters so you can stay in touch with us and hopefully keep coming back to programs and always make sure you're not missing out. We are recording this program tonight. We have started recording. So another reason why I've asked you to please keep your video cameras off so we make sure that it's only the panelists during this presentation who we see. And on that note, there's a couple settings on Zoom as far as like watching it. There's a speaker view and a gallery view. So I would suggest putting it on speaker view. So when the person who's speaking is taking up the bulk of the screen that you're watching. And lastly, there is going to be a Q&A at the end of the program. So until then, your chat button, which is the little chat icon at the bottom of your screen, is disabled. We just, prefer you hold your questions until the end so it's not distracting throughout. So if you do have a question that comes up, just make a note, jot it down. We will open the chat box up at the end and there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have either to Michael or Adam. So quickly, I'm gonna pass the mic over to Alex at Gastro Obscura, and he's going to tell you a little bit about Gastro.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining tonight. So I am the editor of Gastro Obscura, whose mission is to inspire wonder and curiosity about food and drink. That's what we're trying to do here with MOFAD and our wonderful speakers tonight. So if you visit our website, you'll find articles and stories and guides that help explore wondrous foods and the people who make them. And of course, in partnership with chefs and food writers and other wonderful people, we help curious readers and travelers like yourself explore culinary wonders. And we are part of atlasobscura.com, which I encourage you to visit as well to find more articles and stories and videos and events and experiences like this one. This is all part of our Wonder from Home. We like to help people travel. Right now, we're helping people experience wonder from home, which I'm sure we are all going to experience tonight, which I'm very much excited for. So yeah, thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Alex. Great, so I want to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Adam Dulye. You want to wave, Adam? Cool, thank you. He's the executive chef for Brewers Association, and he is the co-author of the Beer Pantry, which of course is the book that inspired this talk tonight. He has helmed restaurants that focus on the intersection of beer and food in Vail, Colorado, Portland, Oregon, and San Francisco. Also, we have Michael Harlan Turkell. He is a photographer, a writer, and a podcaster, and he is the co-author of the Beer Pantry. So I'm more than happy to pass it over to my friends, Michael and Adam.
Excellent. Thank you, Sari. Thank you, Alex, MOFAD, and Gastro Obscura. A little more intro about Adam, because he's a wonderful person. We've been good friends and drinking buddies for years. We've collaborated on this book, but what I find fascinating about most people and their association with beer and food is what was their first beer and food experience together. So I know, Adam, you're from Kansas City, and unlike most people I think on here, your first beer wasn't one of those piss yellow lagers that we're used to. You had a really great local brew as one of your first. So what beer was that?
That was a Boulevard Pale Ale from Boulevard Brewing in Kansas City, which started up in the 1980s and was one of the first breweries to really bring about kind of the revolution of what happened with diversity of styles and flavors that we see in craft beer today. And so luckily my parents kept their fridge stocked with Boulevard Wheat and Boulevard Pale Ale, and at a non to be mentioned here age, I decided it was time to try one. So yeah, that's I think, that can be traced back for a good story there, but definitely no idea then that it would turn into what it is now.
Yeah, so that beer, like you said before, it was at the forefront of what we call now craft brewing. Can you define what craft brewing is before we launch into the food aspect of this?
I'll do my best for a short description, because we've done a good job of creating it a little bit confusing. But craft brewing in a definition for what we're talking about with the Beer Pantry and where it's going are small breweries around the world that are innovating and creating classic and new styles, and in a large part have a deep connection into their community, both in the service of the beverage side as well as the food side. Think of it as everything you would expect from your local restaurant, or the word farm to table. Craft beer is to brewing what farm to table is to cuisine.
I think those parallels are going to be very important throughout tonight's talk. And in that, beer and food pair great together. We know that. We wrote a book about that. That is your life, Adam. What food is Kansas City known for, maybe other than burnt ends?
Other than burnt ends. Oh, you took my answer of saying.
Yeah. It's fine if it's burnt ends, because I've had Boulevard and burnt ends together and they pair beautifully. But what would you have drank a Boulevard Pale Ale or a Boulevard Tank 7 with once you realize that beer and food go well together?
Honestly, probably one of the, unknown things of Kansas City is there's kind of there was then and still to this day, a little bit of an underground fried chicken and meatloaf kind of battle going on between the two kind of family style serving meals that are there. And so, I think if you're moving outside of that barbecue realm, that's a good way to kind of move into with that. And, some of those heartier flavors that are in there. And both of those work just fine, whether you go with a pale ale or with a wheat.
That is your pairing history. I want to dive into the history of beer and food, because those two things are also very parallel in that, beer and bread are almost synonymous in what they're made from. So 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, there was a Sumerian poem honoring Ninkasi. And Ninkasi's brewery out where, Adam?
They're in Oregon.
So Ninkasi is the patron god of brewing, but beer, or the barley that they used, was via bread. Cereal grains, were used to brew a lot of beer, but they were also brewed in conjunction with things like grapes and honey and rice. And this was also happening contemporaneously in China. But we're talking 6,000 years ago, there was already beer and food pairing. Then you fast forward to 2000 BC, and we look at Egyptian bakeries, which were actually breweries at the same time, again, both using barley. The Great Pyramids of Giza had all these workers who actually got daily rations of beer with their bread. I think they got upwards of 4 to 5 liters of beer each day for the hard work that they did. Adam, you're well versed in all this. Where did you see the beginning of beer and food pairing?
So, in a way, it's kind of funny, in a way it's always been there. But where it first started really coming about for the kind of ancient times in there was ale or beer, and a lot of times was safer to drink than water. And so it was naturally what you would have instead of water at a meal there. And then it kind of slowly progressed through. Somewhere around 822, hops were started added to beer, and that changed to start what we see now as the ingredients in beer. And then in the 1500s in Germany, they created a law. It's actually the oldest recorded food and beverage law that is still actually active right now, that said these ingredients make up what we call beer. And then you kind of start to see these old, and I decided to go through some of the old cookbooks I have, and Michael and I were going back and forth on a few of them today. Really in the 1930s, here in the US, you saw people in their cookbooks with recipes in the 1930s. If you've never read one, they are the absolute most entertaining way a recipe has ever been written. But there's a recipe for an ale whip in the 1930s that pairs there. And then starts to come out a little bit more in the 1950s, where when people are asked, oh, what pairs well with food? The common answer is beer goes with everything. And then it started really kind of changing. And this is where you have to kind of think in relation to wine and food pairing. For what we know today, it really didn't come around until the 1970s, 80s, and then really for where we're at now into the 90s. So we are very young in the kind of realm where beer is starting to be thought of the same way as wine or spirits and pairing. Yeah,
in the Middle Ages, Flemish and Belgian monks would give food and drink to travelers. And it was primarily beer because grapes were sparse at that time. But I want to talk about that, I don't know how to pronounce it in German, but the Gebot, the Reinheitsgebot purity law. What's so fascinating about that is it was about it restricted what ingredients you could use in beer. And that was water, barley, and hops. And then yeast was added in the 1850s after Pasteur discovered it. And then in Germany in like the 1870s, Otto von Bismarck then proliferated that law. There have also been other laws that have restricted beer and food. I was reading about German beer gardens in the 19th century. What was so fascinating is that when they began food service, there was this revolt against it and it was initially forbidden because local taverns couldn't compete with the atmosphere. So it became BYOF, bring your own food. And it wasn't until lagering happened that these beer gardens became more and more popular that Bavarian food was actually served. So that's why you see Bretzen soft pretzels or that Obatza cheese dip, grilled chicken, grilled fish, because it was mainly on rivers, and of course, bratwurst. So I thought it was really interesting that beer gardens might have been the initial beer and food restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. And, at that time, that was also when a lot of people were using beer as a part of the cooking. The broth simmered in the beer used in the pretzels, the beer used to poach the fish, the beer used in a vinaigrette. And that started kind of carrying forward and carrying on to where, even to this present day, you can still look up somewhere and find a recipe for an 11 beer chili. And it took a long time to pivot away kind of from that cooking with beer to cooking for beer.
And that right there in Bolden, that is the marquee statement of the Beer Pantry, to cook for beer, not just with beer. Wine and food have such pairings like muscadet and oysters, champagne and caviar, those big red glasses of Zinfandel with a juicy steak. What are the beer and food pairings that you've seen become maybe as epic or as pronounced as those things?
I think that, stout and oysters has gone into that realm. And that's one that kind of took a while to get there, because you look at a deep, dark stout and you never think it's going to be refreshing with a salty, briny oyster, but the combination is amazing. Maybe not as photogenic as the aforementioned spirit with it, but, nonetheless, very flavorful. And I think that's one there. On the absolute casual side of it, the IPA and the burger has become a classic kind of thing in there. And what that actually goes to is more of about pairing with fat, and uniquely an ingredient that's in beer that is not in a lot of other beverage is carbonation and how that reacts on the palate. I think that there's also a few other ones that have kind of come around in there where almost any beer with cheese has kind of shown people a new appreciation for a cheese they previously tasted on its own or with wine. And so that whole kind of world of just saying beer and cheese goes into a respect of itself.
Now I'm going to revert back and talk about cooking with beer for a second, because there are those well-known recipes like Welsh rarebit, that recipe from Wales where you mix beer and mustard and paprika and cayenne and Worcestershire sauce and make this like fondue that you serve over toast. Beer and bread have, again, been this very parallel thing. Why is that?
Part of it comes down to the ingredient similarity that's in there, and the connection that they have with the grains and the milling, and very historically, as you noted as well, beer was made from those same ingredients there. But there's a reaction that happens with the yeast, with the aromas that are in there that really kind of go into something that triggers memories, triggers flavors and stories in there. On the palate, you have your taste buds, but aroma-wise, you have such a wider range of being able to capture things. And beer and bread share so many common aromas in there that it just triggers those memories.
And like you had mentioned before too, when yeast turns sugars or converts sugar, it turns it into CO2 and alcohol. So it's that carbonization, which is such a big part of beer that isn't a part of wine. We could also talk about like Vienna bread, which is that, roll that you get at a bodega and bacon, egg, and cheese on. That was actually made with brewer's yeast or barm before it was ever commercially made. You have Irish brown breads, which is a form of soda bread, and it was often used with stout before baking soda replaced the leavening agent. Then you can kind of flip it and talk about kvass, which is a Baltic low ABV drink made from bread, from like rye, really black bread. And I also know of a really amazing brewery, I think in Indiana, called Scratch Brewing, which uses sourdough starter to start their beer. So those two things are tied in together. But then why do we have things like beer soups, that German, Wisconsin, roux-based potato thickened delicacy?
They came about in a large way of trying to popularize beer. And for a long time, beer was what you had on the weekend or before dinner or during the day or after work, but it's not what you had with dinner or with lunch. And so there was a large push to try to integrate people into learning to have beer with a meal. And historically, we latched onto this idea of, okay, well, then we should cook with it. And if you're having a beer cheese soup, the logical thing you would have with a beer cheese soup is a beer. If you're having beer bread and a sandwich on beer bread, the logical thing you would have is a beer with that. That didn't quite take off so much, and it created its own subsect of cuisines where there is that part where cooking with beer does make sense. But what happened is, if you look historically in cooking with wine or cooking with even just alcohol in general, it was most commonly used where it was needed for a scientific reaction, like in the recipe that we're going to demo tonight. You needed it for a chemical reaction to have something go, not what we started doing, which was, I'm making cheese soup, let's add beer. I'm making chili, let's add beer. I'm cooking bratwurst, let's marinate them in beer. Those moved away from actually alcohol's role in cuisine.
I've got a chicken I want to grill, let's stick a can up its ass.
It's good to hold it there.
Yeah.
It can also be the waste of a perfectly good can of beer.
Yeah, I've been trying to, the origins of beer can chicken aren't really the most cognizant. I've found really amazing names that you can call it too. Chicken on a throne, beer butt chicken, coca can, which is like my favorite one, dancing chicken. But there are rumors that Steve Rashlin from Barbecue U invented it, though I think it had proliferated around the South prior to his call to invention. But like you said, that's more of a way of cooking it than really utilizing the beer. What about beer battering? Is that similar to using beer in bread as a leavening agent?
Yeah, so beer battering, again, that brings in that scientific piece to it, right? Think about some of the world's most renowned tempura batters. They're made very often, very fresh, and a lot of times they rely on a bicarbonate in there, right? So beer can provide some part of that. And the carbonation and the flavor can go in to help lift that up. You don't always need a lot of it, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of beer, but that's a perfect example of where it can be used to attain the light, crispy texture you're looking for in a fried item.
And let's talk about dessert then. Chocolate stout cakes. We see them during St. Pat's made with Guinness. There are gingerbreads that use them. There's a Brazilian bollo de cerveja, which uses a stout beer. Why is beer used in those kind of batters?
You know, that's a more of a celebration use for the recipe. And they've, again, like you mentioned, a holiday there, and it's become a tradition there. You know, there's the chocolate cakes. There's a bread called rug broth. That's another one. These are celebration things, much that are like akin to using rum to soak fruit in for a fruit cake. And they've kind of created out that niche for themselves that it's a special occasion thing, and you're replacing a common liquid with a beer for either a societal kind of tradition or for a flavor addition. To be really honest, the flavor is going to be very minimal in there, especially when you're using, you know, think of it this way, as if you're using properly a good milk stout or chocolate stout along with a really good cocoa powder, right? Not just the low-level cocoa powders, and along with a good butter, you're going to taste that butter, and you're going to taste that cocoa powder, and you're not going to pick up any of the notes of the beer.
So it's more of a hydration than anything else.
Absolutely.
I think one of the most interesting beer pairings out there is one of the most obvious, bar nuts, beer nuts, which are almost a misnomer because they don't actually have beer in the recipe. They are made to enjoy with beer. So that is a beer pairing.
It is. That is possibly one of the earliest beer pairings in the United States is beer and bar nuts.
Yeah, and I love that, you know, beer nuts don't actually have beer. I'm sure you can invent a recipe that utilizes beer, but why change something? Why fix something that's not broken?
Absolutely.
So as we talk about these pairings, it feels overwhelming to know about the history of beer, know about the history of food, where those two things collided. That I am not a layman when it comes to drinking beer. Adam knows I come out to Great American Beer Festival every year and work on a amazing event that he puts on called Paired, and 25 brewers, 25 chefs come together, make two dishes, serve it with two styles of beer. So I understand why things work, but I can't remember all of it. So Adam's so elegantly broken it down for people like me into this 6-pack of flavor profiles. And I don't mean flavor profiles for beer alone. These are flavor profiles that work for both beer and food. Can you tell me why you arrived at that, why you made it easier, an entry point for maybe novice drinkers or novice cooks to be able to enjoy both sides of the coin?
Absolutely. So it started with introducing beer in the restaurants and starting to work more with breweries in the restaurants that I was in. And then realizing that when we were training our front of the house staff to talk to tables and guests coming in about beer, in the world of beer, we did not do ourselves any favors in creating styles and descriptors of styles. And then we took it a step further when we went into education. And you completely lose somebody new to it when you say up to a table, hey, good evening, how are you tonight? Would you like to try something, you know, like an IPA? It's got an IBU of 93, its SRM is 7, and its original gravity is 6.5. And you're just like, no, I'll have a Sauvignon Blanc because I know what that means. And so all of this language missed a lot of the marks because one of the things we realize in taking care of people when they come into our homes, into our restaurants, to our events, is that they want to have a sense of comfort. And they want to have a sense of knowing something. And so I thought, okay, let's take all of this beer, and we also made it confusing too. With the time that Michael and I wrote the Beer Pantry, there were over 140 styles of beer. That number has since grown. That's too much. Let's narrow this down to where we can have it in an elevator pitch conversation. And that's where we came to the idea of saying, we're going to have a flavor 6-pack. You're going to talk to somebody and you're going to say, with words they understand, do you like bitter? Do you like sour? Do you like tart? Do you like crisp? Do you like rich and roasty? Everyone can relate to those. Now you can grab onto something. Now you can bring them into this. Ooh, that sounds good. I like that. You know, and one of the things that when Michael and I first started talking, he said, you know, the way beer and quite honestly all beverage should be talked about is when you approach someone, you should ask them if they're in a mood, you know, hey, good evening. How do you guys feel about tonight for something that's crisp, has a slight effervescence to it, a hint of minerality, and a touch of melon? Notice in that sentence, I didn't denote whether that was beer, wine, or a spirit, but I used descriptors to bring them into this world that I can then take them and get them, in my case, for our stuff, a beer they want, but in any restaurant's case, to the beverage they most want to have.
I'm going to share my screen so you can all see a little PowerPoint that I put together of the Beer Pantry and this 6-pack specifically. So the 6-pack is broken into these 6 different flavor profiles, and you'll see after crisp and clean, there's a list of certain beers. Amber Lager, Blonde Ales, Helles Kolsch, Maibach, Pilsner. Again, you don't have to remember this terminology as long as you remember crisp and clean. I'm a hoppy and bitter guy. You know, I like my IPAs. I usually pass over malty and sweet. I've never really felt akin with that. Rich and roasty, I'm getting used to. I actually have a cat who had a Schwarz beer named after him. And fruity and spicy, I like aspects of it, but then I go straight to sour, tart, and funky. What's funny is I think I didn't twist Adam's arm, but I curated tonight to drinking the beers that I want to drink. You know, very selfish. No, I mean, it was altruistic of Adam to let me do so. But by breaking these things down, again, you don't have to remember the beers in the 6-pack. You just have to remember the descriptors. And these are the beers. Look at them. You know, you have crisp and clean, and then you have hoppy and bitter, malty and sweet, rich and roasty, fruity and spicy, sour, tart, and funky. There's definitely a perception, a visual perception that you have by looking at these. Which one do you think is the heaviest here? Most people gravitate towards that dark one. But Adam, is that the heaviest beer that there is on this screen?
I think on this screen, that's actually the second lightest one.
Why is that? Let's talk about Plato and turbidity.
So that's a common misconception that happens, again, because of to the creativity and you know, diversity of styles we're making. Is a lot of people think that when they see that dark beer, it goes to a barrel-aged imperial stout or something that's really big and has been aged in a barrel and was big. But if you go to the basics of a stout or a porter, their average alcohol is in the 5% range. They're very low. That's one of the things that makes it, going back, an amazing pairing with an oyster. They have an amazing burst of carbonation. They finish, to be honest, really fast. But the color of the beer makes it a little bit challenging to get people over, because they see that darkness and they, in their brain, equate it to a big, super old whiskey, a giant, huge Zin. And they go into that, oh, that's too heavy. But in a lot of cases, they can be very refreshing when paired appropriately.
I feel like the same disservice has happened with hoppy and bitter, with IPAs. You can tell someone, oh, would you like an IPA? Oh, I don't like hoppy beers. Well, which hops don't you like? There are hundreds upon hundreds of different hops that have different characteristics. So I'm going to share screen again really quickly. And we made these flavor wheels that not only tell you the beer styles, but also tell you about food pairings that go along with them. Can you explain a little bit about how you broke it down into vegetables, proteins, dairies, herbs, aromatics?
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things to note in here as well, too, is that hoppy and bitter is not just IPA. That is a very common misconception, and also along the lines of the same thing, where a lot of people are like, oh, if I've had one IPA and I didn't like it, I don't like IPA. that doesn't work, and it's the same that it goes across all beverage categories. There's something that's out there for you. But this goes back to what Michael was talking about in relation to hops. There's hops out there that are very fruity, and there are hops out there that are citrusy. There are hops that are out there that are herbal and aromatic, and they all kind of go into a different part of the wheel, right? Almost every word that is up there, you know, garlic, there are hops that smell like garlic. Chives, there are definitely hops that smell like chives. Watercress, there are definitely hops that have notes of pepper on them. There's not a hop yet that smells like fried chicken. As soon as it happens, I will let you know. But the way it kind of works in there is you can target an ingredient, okay? And let's say you have something that is huge garlic, right? Italian takeout right now during this time where we're all at home. There's a lot of garlic happening in there. Hops and an IPA or an ESB, which stands for extra special bitter, or a pale ale can kind of help tone that down and pull that back. And there's some amazing pairings that happen in there with that. And you look into those ingredients that are in there and how they kind of relate in there and what they can do. One of the biggest things that the combination of hops and carbonation can do is relieve your palate from feeling coated in fat. If you have a cream sauce, if you have a butter sauce, if you have something that is just so rich, hops and carbonation are the way to keep your palate awake.
I've heard you so often describe it as scrub your palate, and I love that. The visual nature of just like scrubbing away that fat layer to be able to enjoy more and more.
Absolutely.
Let's jump to the next slide, which is rich and roasty. And this is a category that I like aspects of. I'm not a warming spice kind of person. And I've always associated rich and roasty beers with that because they are deep, dark, and complex, unlike myself. But what is it about, what is the misconception about rich and roasty beers and how to pair that with food?
So I think one of the ones is to look at some of the beers that are in this. You know, the first one we list in there is a brown ale. A brown ale, think of that as the Pinot Noir of the beer world. It can cross from salmon to chicken to root vegetables to brown butter to coffee. It has a lot of kind of range that goes in there. You know, beyond chocolate and desserts, these are beers that do really well when you have fat and salinity, when you have char, when you have nuts, when you have something braised. They set a little bit of tone of comfort from their color. Again, thinking to some of the other beverages we're talking about there. In some cases, they can be complex, but in some cases, they can have such a simple clearing attribute to them that brings them down a little bit and makes them a little bit more simpler.
And it's not a terrible thing to pair, say, an oatmeal stout with oatmeal or a chocolate stout with chocolate. It makes sense.
Yeah. But see, when you do that, and that's a good thing to talk about, when you go like with like, right? An oatmeal stout with oatmeal, you're gonna, while it's going to taste great, you're going to be on the same line. Your oatmeal tastes like oatmeal. Your oatmeal stout tastes like oatmeal.
I just made myself seem like I drink oatmeal stout with my oatmeal in the morning. So let's focus on the chocolate stout.
Okay, we'll go to the chocolate stout and not your breakfast routine, which is totally acceptable during this time. So chocolate stout and chocolate cake, or chocolate stout and just a bar of chocolate. You're going to actually end up hiding flavors from both by that. Again, is it going to be amazing? Probably. Could it be better? Yes. And that's where you get to breaking it out and pushing them against each other a little bit.
Next one I want to talk about is sour, tart, and funky, which is a very new style of beer, at least in the Americas. It's the one that people are experimenting, I think, with the most. Why is that?
This has the one that, you know, this ties over the most to wine flavors. Granted, the way you get there is by doing absolutely what a winery would not want you to do, because you're using like a Brettanomyces to get that sour, or you're going for a spontaneous fermentation. It's been taking off in the U.S. recently because it has been bringing flavors around to people where they've realized them from cocktails or wine, and they're also very unique and very shareable. These styles have been around for ages. Belgium has some of the most amazing lambic, goose, Flanders, Creek beers that are out there. And these beers are also incredibly ageable, and they change as they age. Going back 2 jumps to the hoppy and bitter, don't ever age those. Hops, while yes, they are a preservative, the aroma dies off really quick, and you want to drink those fresh. Sour, tart, and funky, they're really fun to lay down. Like for the recipe we're doing tonight, I'm actually using a Firestone Walker one from their barrel works. It's called a Bretta Rosé. I've actually had this one hanging around for a little bit. This was actually bottled in 2017. And we opened it up tonight and tried it. It's an entirely different beer than it was 3 years ago.
Well, I'm thirsty. I think everyone should open the beers that they have with them right now, because before we even cook, oh, yours is already half drank.
Mm-hmm.
So is mine, before we even got on this. Let's talk about these beer and ingredient pairings. I hope everyone has a carrot or chili or hot sauce or chocolate or peanuts or yogurt or goat cheese in front of them. Let's first do, we're going to do hoppy and bitter with either carrot, chili, or hot sauce.
Yes.
Why does that work?
So if you have hot sauce, congratulations, you're the prize winner for the evening. So hot sauce, there's an age-old misconception that hops actually intensify heat. They actually don't. They actually calm it down much better than milk or salt, as I can personally attest to from bad personal experiences from farmers who thought it was funny in the past. But I would much rather have a big IPA than a glass of milk and salt poured on my tongue. But you'll see that with hot sauce, the carbonation in the hops will take the heat and the capsaicin away. To go into why that happens, beer has a very unique thing, as does hot sauce or anything with heat. In the back of your throat, you have what's called your trigeminal nerve. That nerve picks up 2 things very unique that beer and hot sauce have. It recognizes carbonation, and it recognizes capsaicin. It then sends that to the brain that triggers memories, and that activates that part of the brain. Still beverages do not activate the trigeminal nerve. It comes into a whole different level of pairing with that. Now, if you are super sensitive to hot sauce, nothing's going to help you.
I'm going back for another catful. I'm just doing that. I'm doing hot sauce bumps right now.
I like it. With the carrot, root vegetables in general, and carrots, they have this earthy sweetness to them. That complements the hops. It pulls down a little bit of bitter. So if you like the bitter component of hops, go hot sauce. If you don't like the bitter component, go carrot. And the carrot's going to pull that bitter down and kind of control some of that flavor that's on your palate and kind of give it a protection there.
I mean, this is why it's good with hot wings, too. You get hot sauce, you get carrots, celery, and IPA.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds wonderful.
The ranch is just there as a garnish. Really, you just need the beer.
True, true. Let's move into rich and roasty.
Okay.
I was able to find a favorite. I'm very Michigan-centric right now. This is a Founder's Breakfast Stout, a double chocolate coffee oatmeal stout. Good eating breakfast. And I'm not much of a peanut fan. I'm trying to become one. But instead, I got some chocolate, and I thought this was appropriate. I got the Ritter Sport cornflake. I thought for the breakfast stout, it just made sense.
Yeah.
But
you didn't want to do whole oatmeal?
But am I doing that correctly, pairing a milk chocolate with a very dark-seeming chocolate stout?
Really, any chocolate will work. What it's about there is the fat, and getting that creaminess from the cocoa butter that's in there. So when I say any chocolate, I'm kind of leaving white chocolate out for a minute, but that's a whole nother topic. But milk, semi-sweet, dark, even if you like super bitter and going up into the 80s and 90s for percent of chocolate, they're all going to pull different flavors out of the beer. The main thing you're trying to do is get a layer and get that layer down on your palate before you get some of the beer in there. Let the carbonation kind of push it away. What that's going to do is push things towards the roof of your mouth, up into your nasal area, and that's where the aromas are going to kind of kick in. So, interesting for you, you should actually be smelling cornflakes.
Well, that's because I shoved cornflakes up my nose before we started, but that's a whole nother story. No, this is delicious. And like you said, it really does create that layer, almost like a film that it slightly scrubs away, but it's almost like having a layer cake in your mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's you know, this can be what would be described as a more complex pairing as you kind of let it sit.
What does it do for peanuts?
So for peanuts in there, really what that pulls on is the salinity, because 9 times out of 10 when you're looking at peanuts, they're salt roasted. And you're looking at kind of, there's an initial starting texture, right? You get that first crunch of a peanut and you start to get that peanut flavor. And then as you chew the peanut, this is assuming you chew peanuts, you start to break them down, right? And all of a sudden you get almost a natural peanut butter in your mouth. You've activated the fat that's in the nut and it's kind of moving around and coating, and you're getting this kind of roast flavor that comes from it. Then the beer comes in and that pulls out the roast that's in the malt, right? The beer that like Michael's drinking, or many of you might be drinking right now, that is a roasted malt. So like there is chocolate malt in that beer. If you ever have a chance to go to a homebrew shop, or if you're at your local brewery and they brew beers like this, ask them just to get a little bit of malt. You can actually eat it. It's a little crunchy, but you can eat malt. It's totally fine to try. It's going to have just this roasty flavor. And a lot of people are going to be like, oh, wow, this tastes like a toasted nut.
We're going to move on to number 3, which is the sour tart and funky. And with that, we paired either goat cheese or yogurt, or like everybody's making right now, sourdough. What is it about those trifecta of fermentative ingredients that pair so well with a sour?
You know, so sour, one, you want something that's kind of like that dairy fat, that goat cheese that's in there. You know, that works.
Represent. Sorry.
And again, like I said, they have this, you know, amazingly beautiful color. You know, Alex had one as well too, but you look at the color that are in these, they are just great to showcase with it. But then they pull, right? If you just taste it, take a little sip of them, you get activated kind of in here. And all of a sudden now you find you're salivating more. Okay, we need to fix that. How do you fix that? Well, smoked foods are a really good way to do that. Bacon. Dairy fats, cheeses are a really great way to do that. We're going to use goat cheese here tonight, and I just threw my dates in the oven there. And then this is also a really good example of where we bring actually a use of cooking with beer in. Kind of in a nod to Michael as well with one of his other books, Acid Trip. We're using beer here to replace vinegar in a classic gastrique, right? So remember when I said there's cooking with beer where you're just kind of throwing everybody's leftover beer into a chili and that means nothing other than it's a good Instagram post. What we're doing here is we brought sugar to a caramel, and now we need an acid, which is part of the classic sauce of a gastrique, to bring it down. Instead of using a vinegar, you just tasted the acid that's in this beer. We're going to use this beer to replace that. It's not because I want you to taste the beer in the sauce. Rather, what's going to happen with this with the beer I'm using, it's going to actually pull out like a deep berry flavor, which isn't present in the beer when you drink it, but it's going to go really well with the date and the goat cheese and a little bit of the smokiness of the bacon.
You said you already threw those in. Do you have any demo to show us of how to actually make this date? I know there's a little incision, a little stuffing going on.
So yeah, I made a little incision. So let me grab one that's probably not super hot at the moment. Here we go. So it's a little warm. Date, whether you pit it or whether you get them pitted or whether you pit them yourselves is entirely up to you. Having them not all the way through is always a great way to go because you want to get as much goat cheese in the middle of them as you can. That's a key thing for it. And then kind of sealing them up. It's totally fine. The goat cheese can leak out. It's not going to go anywhere. You know, on the recipe, we do the bacon in the pan. We hit it with a little bit of thyme and garlic because we want those aromatics in there. People often see these served with picks. That's just so they can pick them up really easy. But again, wrapping it so that it's in there. The bacon is very, very lightly cooked, just like so. And they're wrapped. The flavor's in there. We used the dates in the fat to get them a little bit warmed up there. And then they're going to go back in the oven. These are super easy. You can make them ahead of time. and have them in the fridge and just pop a few in the oven when you want them for a snack. They hold up really, really well. And it's a good little salty kind of sweet appetizer to go with. We're going to brush them with the gastrique because we want to add that kind of level of kind of rich berry note into it.
And then what would you drink with that?
So you can drink the beer that you use for the gastrique in it. That is one of the reasons why a sour beer can sometimes be used well in this, because these are very hard to drink quite a lot of, right? If you could imagine having a pint of IPA followed by a pint of a sour ale, that's quite a lot of sour to go in there. So they have a little bit in there, but really play around with anything that has either been spontaneously fermented or dosed with some Brettanomyces. It's going to give you a little bit more of a funk kind of in there. Commonly, that's like the hay, wet sock, barnyard strain that goes in there. But in the cooking aspect, they have a little bit more. I have two very active sous chefs now. There's bacon in the oven.
I'm going to jump back to share screen because I want to show a couple of the recipes that are paired with these different flavor profiles. With Crisp and Clean, I love your radishes dipped in hot butter. It's so simple, so striking. And Crisp and Clean beers include things like Kolsch's and Pilsners. There's a great grilled clams you do with spicy corn and garlic aioli. Hoppy and Bitter. You use that carrot actually in the dessert realm in carrot cake. There's also like a carrot salad that you make, which has like carrot manipulated 4 different ways and a whole bunch of grains, which is delicious. But I love the seared salmon. That caraway interacting with Hoppy and Bitter is a fantastic thing, as well as the creme fraiche. Malty and sweet. Of course, we had to do some gingerbread molasses cookies. But a surprising one is this tagliatelle you make with oxtail and tomato sugo. Tell me why that works.
So that works from kind of the acid and the richness of the tomato. And then again, going back to the richness of the oxtail, wanting the malt to kind of come down in there. Amber ales, or anything that has kind of that amber color in tomato sauces is a very, very successful pairing. And then kind of going to what you just clicked over into here with the rich and roasty, right? This grilled ribeye with heirloom tomato, right? This we put in there specifically to go with, like, you can have your steak and your peak season tomatoes outside on the patio and have a dark beer in the glass and not feel bogged down by it. And then when you do want to feel bogged down by it, you make the peanut butter semi-Fredo.
Which is ridiculous. Fruity and spicy, I thought, I pulled 2 really interesting recipes from here because a lot of people know Belgian, beer steamed mussels. Again, it was one of those situations, why fix something that's not broken? But the replacement of Saison in like a coq au vin preparation, why and how does that work?
So again, that's going to using the beer for the purpose of deglazing the pan with the coq au saison. So, and to me, that was a great one to kind of bridge, because when you go to France, coq au vin is different in every region of France that you go to. And where they make coq au vin, they use the wine that is to their region. So for here, it's kind of the same thing. I'm saying, okay, we're using it to deglaze the pan, pick up all of that reaction that happened on the chicken skin searing, the vegetables caramelizing and all that. And it's a very kind of light addition to it that kind of brightens it up a little bit and really lets the chicken flavor come through.
And lastly, sour, tart, and funky. We are doing the aforementioned goat cheese stuffed dates with bacon and sour ale gastrique. But I love how wonderfully, almost spritzy, the marinated melons with prosciutto and goat cheese are.
Yeah, and that's just a classic, taking that melon and prosciutto, that light melon, that salty prosciutto, and really letting it pull with the palate to bring it in there. Think of this as your Prosecco pairing. Think of this as your aperitif. I think it's good to mention here that one of the great things with beer, and we're starting to see this really with everything, is that the alcohol, the ABV, the alcohol level no longer matters. Use your food to bridge it. If you want to start with a sour beer, go for it. Use food to bridge yourself to the next beer, and you will be able to make it all the way through so that you can pair with what you want. ages ago, it was always start with your lightest beer, finish with your heaviest beer. And that's how this whole chocolate and chocolate stout thing happened. Is it was like, well, I guess my biggest beer is my imperial stout, so I'll go chocolate. No longer does that matter. It's what the food is with it that matters now.
So how are those dates looking? Let's take a look.
I'm pulling them out. It's happening here. So I picked up a little bit of Mizuno and arugula from a local farm stand. This is perhaps one of the best times to mention as well, to get out and support the local farms and local breweries. You probably can't see what I'm doing here. I'm pouring the bacon fat onto the Mizuno and the arugula because that's the dressing for that kind of for the garnish for there. So, you can kind of see with them here that the bacon holds on there. The date is still in there. We did not need the pick kind of for that. There's a good aroma that's kind of happening coming from the bacon. It's actually going to be great with the sour that's coming up in there. Man, did anybody else make the dates? And, while I'm finishing this up, if you want to kind of open this up to, or let us know if we had any questions that came about while we were talking.
Yeah, I just want to mention two quick things before that. You mentioned this interesting aspect of seasonality and locality. It's such a wonderful thing that has started within the craft brewing and craft cooking community, that breweries and chefs are collaborating, or breweries have chefs of their own. I mean, you are the executive chef of the Brewers Association. What is also important to note is that though we have these 6 different, the 6-pack of flavor profiles, it's nice to know that you're not going to be confused by having a Kolsch that's made in Cologne, Germany versus one that's California. Those styles are still pseudo-dictated by a certain flavor profile. At least I think they still are.
So I'll try and get it in there as well too, but that is the gas streak in there. Yeah, actually I was able to do that kind of. So you can see how it sticks a little bit to the pan, but it rolls off. The bubbles in there are just from the heat, but that's a nice glaze that's going to finish in there for it. And really when you smell this, you're not going to smell anything that's in the beer there with it. You're just going to smell kind of the caramel and some berry. And we're just going to kind of finish that on the bacon there. Personally, for me, I want a little bit on the greens right now too, because that's just going to kind of add a little bit of nice caramel to it. And I just made my appetizer for dinner tonight. So feeling pretty good about that. So that's the dates. A little bit of Mizuno and arugula in there. The goat cheese, the bacon, good aroma kind of coming off of that. And we're going to have that with a little bit more of the Bretta Rosé that we have.
Wonderful. Let's open it up to Q&A so I can start drinking.
You are very welcome to start drinking, Michael.
Thank you.
Chef Adam, thank you so much for that very, very interesting conversation. I can say that I am starving now. Everything you said sounded delicious. I also want to say that this was the first MOFAD event that I recall that the phrase beer butt chicken was used, but I hope it's not the last. So anyone who has questions for Michael or Adam, please feel free to just go to the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and you can just chat them in. I'm just curious, Adam, what else were you making for dinner tonight?
Actually, just a giant salad after that.
Yeah, fair enough.
The salad greens at the farm stand today were amazing. So it was literally like, okay, and it's been pretty warm here today. We had a little bit of a cold streak out here in Colorado. So a salad with some vegetables and the lemon vinaigrette just sounded really, really good for us.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Michael, did you eat dinner yet?
No, not yet. I am having a burrito with whatever is left in the fridge, and I am having 3 beers with it.
Which are?
The Two Hearted, the Founder's Breakfast Stout, and the Brooklyn Bel Air. And maybe I'll have some hot sauce, carrot, chocolate, and yogurt as well, since I already have that out.
Fantastic. And Adam, do you have a favorite beer of all the beers?
I do not. And I know that's like a bad answer to a really good question. It really depends on, for me, the sense of place, the recipe that's happening with it. Having a beer at the brewery can be a completely different flavor than having the beer at home. And so for me, for that reason, I really don't have a favorite beer. It also depends on how the day's been kind of going. You know, for a day like today, I'm a bit with Michael. I go a little bit towards the hoppy and bitter. If it's been a hotter day and it's been a long day for an event or a kitchen, I'll go right to a Kolsch or a Pilsner.
Totally. Cool. Well, we have some questions for you. This is from Lucy. They ask, I saw 3 or 4 of the wheels of good pairings with types of beer, but can you show the rest? Where? And they also want to know where each of you are located.
Those pairing wheels we'll send with the follow-up email. It's a PDF separate of the book, but you will definitely have those shortly. And Adam is in Boulder, Colorado. I am in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn. Okay. Alex wants to know, with New England hazy IPAs being so much sweeter and less bitter than normal IPAs, do you feel like they would pair differently than other hoppy bitter beers?
They do pair a little bit differently. They actually are a little bit more challenging to pair with. And they kind of flow a little bit more into the fruity category because a lot of the hazy IPAs have characteristics of melon. If you've got, that's kind of one to look at of what they're using for hops, what the flavor is in there, and kind of pair them that way. They also have a definite different mouthfeel with the viscosity because they have a super high grain bill. So you want to be a little bit careful with those and kind of taste them there.
Yeah, same thing goes with milkshake IPAs. There's so much extra lactose. They're so much sweeter. I actually like doing sweet with sweet at that point, and I'll almost relegate that to the dessert part of a meal.
Great. Another question about those hazy IPAs. What's your take on the hazy IPA trend in general, and what are your favorite beers to drink warm?
So my take on the hazy IPA trend in general is never seen anything like it. I can't believe how crazy that got there. I personally, for me, I can drink a little bit of them, but I can't have to go for a whole pint of them. I think that when they're done right, they are some really amazing and flavorful beers, but they should not be the first beer somebody tries to brew. They are very technical.
Okay. And your favorite beers to drink warm? So
beers to drink warm are going to be the big barrel-aged beers. Think of this again, going to that Zinfandel comparison. If you have a barrel-aged stout, a barrel-aged barley wine, those beers are going to be better a little bit warmer, in that 50-degree kind of range there, because when you have, the colder a beer is, right, getting rid of this frozen mug club thing. The colder a beer is, the more the aroma and the flavor of the beer is suppressed. The warmer a beer is, within reason, the more aroma and flavor you're going to get. So those barrel-aged big beers that you've been aging for a while, or you bought aged, you want to have those in that 48 to 52-degree range because you're going to get a lot more flavor.
Great. Cool. A lot of the discussion, this is from Aaron. A lot of the discussion was around the interplay of beer with fats and a bit with starches. Do you have any recommendations for beer and vegetables? Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So vegetables. So beets are earthy and roasty. So those with stouts, and very simply just boiled beets and stout. I know that just sounded like probably not appetizing because I said the word boiled, but that's a great pairing. The sweetness and the richness and the earthiness of the beet that's in there. Onions are amazing to use to bring out hops. Whether you grill them, roast them, use them raw, fry them, bake them, however you want to use them, they're a great compatibility to hops to kind of bring that down. Herbs are another one, right? A lot of times in salads, just adding a simple kind of mixture of herbs of like, pick whatever you want to. At the end of the day, a lot of herbs go together. If you have parsley, mint, cilantro, dill, chives, all of that kind of tossed into there, those flavors with hoppy beers, ranging into the crisp and clean range, because those are going to be your herbal noble hops in there, to your hoppy and bitter ones, to even your malty and sweet beers that have hops in them. those herbs are just amazing amount of brightness to it. Same thing with citrus. No, that's not, I know that's kind of going away from the vegetable part, but citrus is another one as well too. That's why I said, like, for me tonight, having just a lemon vinaigrette, that's something that is just an amazing kind of component to add that brightens beers.
Anything you want to add there, Michael?
Well, vegetables are made of cellulose, and they're a much more compacted structure than fats and meats. So you need something that actually opens up those protein, or those opens up that cellulose a little bit. So having something that's more highly carbonated, I think, ends up being much nicer with vegetables for me.
Great. Okay, next one is from Adrian. What beer style do you think is most underutilized for food pairings?
Brown ale, hands down. That is the most underutilized style in beer, period. And I think it's because it's brown ale. It's not exciting to say.
But you call it the Pinot Noir. It's not like in that movie Sideways where he starts yelling about Merlot. Like, it works, and it has versatility.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not as brown as people think it is. It's actually a little bit lighter and has some clarity to it. So, but it is definitely the most underutilized style.
Okay. I think this question is for both of you. When you developed the book, what were you most surprised to learn in terms of recipes and flavor development?
For me, I think it was two things. One, it was to stretch my knowledge of how versatile vegetables could be across all styles of beer. And then also two, to really see the breadth of what the sour, tart, and funky beers can do, because they quite honestly are very challenging to pair.
Yeah, I co-sign that.
Okay.
Well, even more so, to break up the idea of wine being paired with certain things and what that beer replacement is, that it doesn't have to taste exactly like that wine.
Okay. Julie asks, could you briefly explain how gravity in beer works?
Sure. There are two parts. There's original gravity and final gravity. In the simplest of terms, it's how you figure out a little bit what your alcohol range is going to be. Original gravity is where you're starting at, and it can range anywhere from in the 5s up to X amount. And then when you get to your finished product, you'll have a final gravity number. And that number is going to be kind of a little bit closer to what your ABV is. So when brewers are forecasting out recipes, they'll target what they want for their original gravity and final gravity so that they can figure out what they want the final ABV to be.
Excellent. Okay, this is from Brianne. We've been gardening in the hot sun most days and gravitate towards PBR for a break in the afternoon. Fair enough. Refreshing. What would pair best with PBR as an afternoon snack?
A second PBR?
I love this question.
Yeah. Well, just to go on what Adam said really quickly, we actually have a 2-beer burger recipe in the book, which doesn't have any beer in the recipe. It's just about having a beer while you make the burger and then having a beer with the burger. So that's very important. PBR, not that you necessarily have raw fish laying around, but it goes kind of great with crudo in my mind. Or maybe something even a little snappier, like a cucumber salad.
Absolutely. For me, if I came in from gardening in the hot sun and there was a bowl of ceviche or a bowl of salsa and some chips and a PBR, that would be refreshing.
Delicious. Cool. Alex asks, what is your favorite Pilsner light lager?
It's a good question. On the broad scale of easy to find, because I gravitate a little bit towards the hoppier style of it. Firestone Walker brewed a Pilsner called Pivo. The story of that beer kind of comes from a brewery in Italy, which if you're ever in Italy, there's a beer called Tipo Pils to absolutely seek out. It is one of the most well-made Pilsners and has inspired so many recipes. It inspired Firestone Walker's Pivo Pils. And so for something that's a little easy to find around, that one is up there for me for a Pils.
Russian River, which is very well known for its Pliny the Elder, which Adam started his night off with, actually makes an amazing Pilsner called STS, which blows my mind how focused it is. And then locally, Suarez Brewing, which is somewhere in the Hudson Valley, makes a really great Pilsner.
Great. So I'm going to read you guys one more question. But before I do, it would be great if everyone could just chat in and tell us where you're from, because that's always fun to know where everybody is coming from. So go ahead and just chat your location as we address this. Okay, last question. What would you pair with a salad that has grapefruit, avocado, asparagus, and smoked trout? I wonder if that's what Alex is eating tonight.
For me, I think that you could go a couple different directions there. Because of the asparagus, you could go to a Saison. Because of the smoked trout, you could go to a Pilsner. With the grapefruit, you could go to something that's got a little bit more kind of those citrus noted hops. I think I would probably ultimately end up at a Saison. Kind of also depends on where you're at. If it's warmer, absolutely yes, Saison.
Yeah, that is a funny question. That's almost like a trick question for someone who may have already read the book, because we have a recipe. It's a Dungeness crab with avocado and grapefruit that is in the crisp and clean section, and gets paired with a lot of Kolsch's and Pilsners. But it's that asparagus that throws everything a little bit off. And on that note, it's really interesting to note that so many craft brewers are thinking so culinary minded now too, that I forget who does it. There is an asparagus beer. I don't know if I'd necessarily pair an asparagus beer with asparagus, but there's so many different beers out there now that are thinking about culinary ingredients in ways they never have before.
Yeah, I don't know about that asparagus beer, but I'm happy to know that exists. And I like that there's people in the chat that are like making connections and figuring out that they're from the same part of the country, which is super cool. There's people from all over. Looks like there's people from Central LA, a couple Michiganites, Maryland, Seattle, Manhattan, Columbus. This is great. So I'm gonna close it out and thank Michael and Adam so much. This was interesting and fun and delicious, and I learned so many new things. So I really want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and remind you that this is an ongoing series in partnership between MOFAD and Gastro Obscura that we're doing every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So please make sure that you stay in touch, and we hope to see you all next week. And until then, cheers. Happy drinking, because what else is there to do right now? Happy cooking besides cooking. So happy eating food and drinking beer and combining both of those things now that we both know how. And I will send you guys all an email tomorrow with a follow-up, and I will make sure to also include the link, because if you didn't buy the Beer Pantry already, I'm sure that you want to now. I know that I do. The recipes are delicious. The pictures are gorgeous. So thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely night. Stay safe, everyone. Stay home. Best of luck in this time. Okay. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.